The Valanthe station had never hosted a human before Dr. Sarah Chen arrived. She was the first of her kind to serve on a mixed-species research facility in the Outer Rim, and her presence had caused quite a stir among the 37 different species that called the station home. Some were curious, some were cautious, and some, particularly the Karathi, were absolutely fascinated. The Karathi were small, furry creatures, standing about 3 feet tall, with large, round eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. They had soft, silver-blue pelts that shifted colors slightly depending on their emotional state. Their children, called cubs, were even smaller, barely reaching knee-height on most bipedal species. The adult Karathi worked as engineers and maintenance specialists on the station, their nimble fingers perfect for delicate repair work. Their cubs attended the station's education center during the day while their parents worked. Security Chief Varek was a Threnny, a tall reptilian being with scales the color of deep bronze and eyes that could see in nearly complete darkness. He had served on dozens of stations throughout his long career, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Strange customs, unusual mating rituals, bizarre dietary requirements, territorial disputes over sleeping quarters. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he believed. The night shift on Valanthe Station was always quiet. Most species were diurnal by nature, and even those who preferred darkness tended to rest during the standard cycle to maintain harmony with their colleagues. Varek made his rounds through the dimly lit corridors, checking security feeds on his wrist display as he walked. Everything appeared normal until he reached Corridor 7B, the residential section where the human had been assigned quarters. Something was wrong with the door to Dr. Chen's quarters. It was open. Not fully open, but cracked just enough that a small body could squeeze through. Varek's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm as he approached. Humans were known to be resilient, but they were also vulnerable to many threats. Their immune systems, while remarkably adaptive, could be overwhelmed by certain xenobiological agents. Their bones could break. Their skin could be pierced. They were in many ways quite fragile compared to other spacefaring species. Varek reached the door and peered inside, prepared for anything. What he saw stopped him cold. Dr. Chen was asleep on her standard-issue bunk, her breathing slow and steady. That part was normal. What was not normal was the small army of Karathi cubs surrounding her bed. There were at least 15 of them, possibly more, moving in near-silent coordination. They had gathered materials from somewhere, soft fabrics and thermal blankets and cushioning foam, and they were building something around the sleeping human. At first, Varek thought they might be playing some sort of prank. Cubs of all species were prone to mischief, and the Karathi young were known for their curiosity. But as he watched, he realized this was no prank. The cubs were working with intense focus, their small faces serious with concentration. They were building a nest. One of the cubs, a tiny female with pale blue fur, noticed Varek standing in the doorway. Her eyes went wide with fear, and she made a soft chirping sound that alerted the others. Suddenly, 15 small faces turned toward the security chief, all of them displaying the same expression of guilty terror. Varek raised one clawed finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. He did not want to wake the human. More importantly, he wanted to understand what was happening before he decided how to respond. He beckoned to the pale cub, and she crept toward him on silent feet, her ears flattened against her skull in submission. In the corridor, away from the sleeping human, Varek crouched down to bring himself closer to the cub's eye level. His voice was a low rumble as he asked what they were doing. The cub, whose name was Mira, explained in a trembling voice. She said the human had no nest. The human had been sleeping in her quarters for 7 cycles now, and she had no nest, no warmth keepers, no comfort materials, no protection circle. The cubs had been watching, Mira said. They had seen the human through the observation window in the recreation area. They had seen how she slept alone, with nothing around her, nothing to keep her safe. Varek was confused. He asked Mira to explain what she meant by a protection circle. Mira looked at him as if he had just asked the most obvious question in the universe. She said that all creatures needed protection when they slept. Sleep was vulnerable time. Sleep was when predators came. Every cub knew that you built a nest around those who rested, to keep them warm, to keep them safe, to let them know they were not alone. The human had no one to build her nest. The human was alone. Varek felt something shift in his chest. He had reviewed Dr. Chen's file when she arrived on station. He knew she had traveled alone from Earth, that she had left behind family and friends to pursue her research in xenobiology. He knew that humans were social creatures who formed strong bonds with their companions, but he had not considered what it might mean for such a creature to be truly alone. He looked back through the cracked door at the sleeping human and the elaborate construction taking shape around her bed. The cubs had created a barrier of soft materials that rose nearly 2 feet on all sides. They had woven thermal blankets into a dome-like structure over the foot of the bed. Several cubs were still working, adding layers, adjusting positions, making small sounds of satisfaction when something fit just right. Varek made a decision. He told Mira that he would not interfere, but he warned her that she and her friends should be gone before the human woke. He did not want Dr. Chen to be frightened by finding strange creatures in her quarters. Mira's eyes went wide again, but this time with surprise rather than fear. She asked if Varek was truly going to let them finish. He was the security chief. He was supposed to stop things that were not allowed. Varek considered his response carefully. He said that his job was to keep the station safe. What the cubs were doing posed no threat to anyone. If anything, their actions demonstrated the values that the galactic community was supposed to represent. Care for others, compassion for those in need, the recognition that all beings, regardless of species, deserved kindness. Mira nodded solemnly, accepting his words. She turned and scurried back into the humans' quarters, rejoining her companions in their work. Varek stood in the corridor and watched through the cracked door as the cubs completed their task. When they were finished, they gathered in a small circle around the bed, their heads bowed as if in prayer. Then, one by one, they slipped out of the room and disappeared into the station's corridors, heading back to their own quarters before their parents noticed their absence. Varek remained at his post for a few more minutes, watching the sleeping human. She had shifted slightly during the cub's work, turning onto her side and pulling one arm close to her chest, but she had not woken. Her breathing remained steady, her expression peaceful. Perhaps, Varek thought, some part of her had sensed what was happening. Perhaps some ancient instinct, buried deep in her brain, had recognized the comfort of being surrounded by warmth and care. Perhaps she was having good dreams. When Dr. Chen woke the next morning, she was confused. She sat up in bed and looked around at the elaborate structure that had appeared while she slept. Soft blankets formed walls around her mattress. Cushioning foam had been arranged in neat rows along the floor beside her bed. A thermal sheet had been draped over a framework of support rods to create a kind of canopy above her feet. She reached out and touched one of the blankets. It was Korathi-made. She could tell from the distinctive weave pattern. She had studied enough about the species to recognize their craftsmanship. But why would Korathi blankets be in her room? She had not requisitioned them. She had not asked for any additional supplies. Dr. Chen got up from her bed and examined the construction more closely. It was not random. There was a clear design at work, a purposeful arrangement of materials intended to create a specific effect. She recognized it, she realized, from her research. She had read about Korathi nesting behaviors, how the species built elaborate structures around their young to protect them during sleep. But this nest was not sized for cubs. This nest was sized for her. She felt something catch in her throat. She had been on the station for 3 weeks now, and in that time, she had exchanged polite greetings with her colleagues and participated in mandatory social events and attended her assigned research duties. But she had not made friends. She had not connected with anyone on a personal level. She had told herself it did not matter, that she was here for work, that relationships would come in time. But the truth was that she had been lonely, deeply, achingly lonely in a way she had not experienced since childhood, and someone had noticed. Dr. Chen gathered up some of the blankets and held them close to her chest. She breathed in the scent of them, a faint, earthy smell that she associated with the Karathi maintenance workers who sometimes passed her in the corridors. She wondered who had done this. She wondered why. She found the answer that evening in the station's recreation area. A group of Karathi cubs was gathered around a viewing port, watching the stars. When Dr. Chen approached, they fell silent, their eyes fixed on her with nervous anticipation. One of them, a small female with pale blue fur, stepped forward. The cub introduced herself as Mira. She said she hoped the human was not angry. She said she and her friends had only wanted to help. She said they had seen that the human was alone, and they had wanted her to know that she was not. Not really. Not ever. Dr. Chen knelt down so that she was at eye level with the tiny Karathi. She told Mira that she was not angry. She was grateful. More grateful than she could express. She asked if she could give Mira a hug, explaining that hugging was how humans showed affection. Mira's fur shifted from silver blue to a warm gold color, a sign of happiness in her species. She said yes. She said she would like that very much. Dr. Chen wrapped her arms around the small cub and held her gently. Within seconds, the other cubs swarmed forward, eager to participate in this strange human custom. Dr. Chen found herself surrounded by small, furry bodies, all of them pressing close, all of them making soft sounds of contentment. Security Chief Varek watched from across the recreation area, his expression unreadable. But if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed that his scales had shifted to a slightly warmer hue, a sign of satisfaction in his species. He had made the right decision, he knew. He had allowed something beautiful to happen. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Chen became a fixture in the Karathi community on Valanthi Station. She attended their festivals, learned their songs, and allowed the cubs to teach her the proper technique for nest building. She never slept alone again. Every night, without fail, she would find new additions to the nest around her bed, small gifts and tokens left by her young friends. And when other humans eventually arrived on the station, Dr. Chen made sure they understood. She told them that the Karathi were not just colleagues. They were family. They were proof that kindness existed in the universe, even in the darkest corners of space. They were the creatures who had seen a lonely human sleeping without protection and had decided to do something about it. The story of the nest spread throughout the station and eventually beyond. It became one of those tales that spacers told in bars and mess halls across the galaxy, the story of the human who found family among the stars. The story of the cubs who built a nest around a stranger because they could not bear to see anyone sleep alone. And somewhere on Valanthi Station, a pale blue Karathi named Mira kept a picture of her human friend on her wall, right above her own nest. She was proud of what she had done. She was proud of what all of them had done together. Because that was the point, she knew. That was always the point. No one was meant to be alone.